I want to talk a little bit about Kite's in-house perspective. You know, not every company approaches manufacturing the same way, and that's what's great about this conversation. So, Sagu, of course, I have a few questions for you. Um, Kite has deep manufacturing, in-house manufacturing experience. Uh, what lessons can you share with us that offer to smaller cell and gene therapy companies deciding how much control to keep internal?
Yeah, that's a great question. Cell and gene therapy is technologically very intensive and it's also evolving. So, the things that where you want to keep control is those things that impact your safety, efficacy, and also turnaround time in autologous cell therapy. Those are important factors. And anything that impacts those, you want to keep that control and that knowledge in house. Also, you want to make sure that there's tighter linkage between development and manufacturing. So, for instance, a good process knowledge informs manufacturing, but what you learn in manufacturing operations informs process knowledge also, and it grows the process knowledge because, like I said, there's variability from incoming patient material to incoming patient material. So, learning more, and that needs to be added to the process knowledge, and preserving that link is extremely critical. Also, understanding the quality regulatory expectations of your product, it's really important to keep that knowledge in house and understand that so that the manufacturing can be successful. And we talked a little bit about the choice of internal versus external manufacturing. So even there, that's a balance between what capabilities already exist to serve capacity, speed, cost, and if when the product is still being tested, most importantly, we're going to actually keep it. Probably it makes sense to keep it outsourced because the safety and efficacy are still being tested. But as the volumes increase, it may make more sense to try to keep that in house and bring that control in house. And then you also learn a lot from, again, as I said, as the number of batches increase. So these are some of the things that are really important to keep in house. And from a viral vector standpoint, for example, what Kite did is initially, even right after the first product was approved, we kept the manufacturing outsourced for the viral vector. And then as the volumes increased, we were able to bring it in, improve the process and bring it in. And now we use those manufacturing capabilities for the pipeline products as well. So it's a transition, but bottom line, and anything that in safety, efficacy, turnaround time, and the important, on manufacturing success rate, right? Because that's kind of the name of the game because unless your patients get the product, nothing else happens after that. So anything that impacts those, you want to keep that control in-house.
Yeah, terrific. And I mean, Kite is, of course, one of the gold standards in manufacturing. So this is all really helpful. Thanks, Sagu. Emily, we had a question come in from the audience that perhaps we can address before we move on. Damien is asking, as a cell and gene therapy product moves from phase one through commercialization, the CDMO evolves from pair of extra hands to a named manufacturer in your BLA. How should sponsors manage that shift in dependency and bargaining power, especially when post-approval switching costs are essentially prohibitive? It's a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And hey, Damien, thank you for joining. Um, well, first of all, don't ever forget your power as a sponsor, because even though you're dependent on them for manufacturing, they're getting a ton of very positive PR the further that you move into your commercialization phase or clinical phase. And it's great for them. It's great marketing. It's nothing attracts a crowd like a crowd. So I would remember that. And I think at some point you need to start setting demand standards. So number one, if you're going to be consistently producing more than one batch, remember that your initial cost was probably based on a 1 or 2 time production. So now you're going to gain economies of scale. So I would revisit that particular pricing, and seeing, hey, listen, we'd like to switch to maybe a suite fee or a batch success fee, right? It keeps them continually at that level of quality and regulatory support. So I would start to kind of shift more power into yours and, hey, listen, we'll keep coming back, but we're going to need this, this, and this. And we want to make sure that we're getting this yield and this success rate. And that's a very, very normal thing. And I would also probably, just kind of leverage where they're now, if they've developed a process for you, how are you protecting that IP too? Because the more successful you get, they're going to be able to kind of incorporate that into maybe their platform. So I think it's worth a discussion to protect some parts of the process from an IP perspective. And that can also be something that you leverage and bargain. But it's a business deal like anything else. And you should be asking them to hold a certain level of standards, both from a cost and from a quality perspective, to continue manufacturing.
Thanks, Emily. And Damien, thank you for your question. And before we move on, Sugo, I'd love to give you the opportunity to give Damien some information as well.
Yeah, I think Emily touched on a lot of things. Just to add a little more color to that, I think the IP conversation is critical, not only for what you jointly protect, but sometimes partners are worried about you using that IP for other programs. And then so it's important to go into it with a knowledge of what you can use. Sometimes you may need to have a firewall, but that's important. And the thing, and the first thing Emily mentioned is actually extremely important. It is important to have them agree to some kind of a success rate as opposed to just saying, this is what we're going to pay for every batch, right? And it's important to get into those agreements upfront.